Good evening. Welcome to Obscure Tales of the Strange and Supernatural. I'm your host, Melissa Angel, and tonight I will be sharing the spirited tale of the haunted telephone of New Jersey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this obscure tale of the strange and supernatural. In January of 1879, the New York Sun ran a strange story titled A Haunted Telephone. At that time, telephones were new and few people had them. J.J. O'Connor was a Catholic bookseller and publisher for the Diocese of Newark, New Jersey. He was also an agent for the Cemetery of the Holy Sepulchre in East Orange. The cemetery was 2 miles from J.J. O'Connor's store and residence. Frequently, Mr. O'Connor would send orders and other communications to Mr. Rowe, who was a superintendent in the cemetery. Mr. O'Connor decided to have telephones installed in his house and in the small building used as an office by Mr. Rowe in the cemetery. No other telephone was connected to the cemetery phone. Mr. O'Connor was excited about the phone, as it was a novelty and worked like a charm. Mrs. O'Connor and her friends found the telephone amusing and often used it to converse with those at the cemetery. Being such a new novelty, the phone was in constant use for several days. It made work more efficient for Mr. O'Connor, as orders for the opening of a grave were now able to be sent at a moment's notice. 3 weeks after the telephone was first used, at about 4 a.m, the O'Connors were woken by the ringing of the phone. This was surprising, as Mr. O'Connor knew the cemetery office was locked at 6 o'clock every night when Mr. Rowe and the cemetery workers would go home. Thinking that perhaps it was one of the cemetery workers having caught vandals, Mr. O'Connor answered the phone, thinking that the police were needed. After asking what was wanted, Mr. O'Connor received no answer, save for the ringing of a bell. This was repeated several times with no answer each time. Finally, it was concluded that either the wire was being tampered with, or someone had broken into the office at the cemetery and was pranking Mr. O'Connor. The next morning, Mr. O'Connor told Mr. Geegan, the one who had installed the phone, about the incident. Mr. Geegan explained that the call bell could only be rung using the attached crank in the cemetery office. Questioning Mr. Rowe and the other cemetery workers, they all had the same answer. They had left the previous evening at 6 o'clock as usual. The office was examined and there were no signs of tampering. Having no answers for the mysterious ringing, Mr. Geegan advised Mr. O'Connor to await future developments. That same night, the O'Connors received another mysterious call. Workmen in the cemetery began saying that an evil spirit was the culprit. Writing a letter to Mr. Geegan, Mr. O'Connor said, "If you are in communication with departed spirits, we implore you to see that they will not disturb us at unnecessary hours." A watch was kept on the cemetery office at night, but the O'Connors continued to receive the ghostly calls. Mr. Geegan would go on to say to a reporter of the Sun, "I am not superstitious, but I confess that this thing puzzles me. A spiritualist friend tells me he is certain a spirit has sent the signals to Mr. O'Connor. I know many persons who have telephones in their houses, and some of them are connected with others, yet I never received complaints from them. Mr. O'Connor's telephone has no connection except with the cemetery. I have investigated the thing for weeks, and I cannot even suggest an explanation of the mystery. For mystery, it certainly is. If the instrument were run by a battery, the mystery could be explained, but in this case, I cannot understand it at all. I hope we will soon find out the secret for the sake of the nervous women." Unfortunately, there were no follow-up articles or information on Mr. O'Connor and his haunted phone. So what do you think caused the phone to ring on its own? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. That concludes this week's Obscure Tales of the Strange and Supernatural. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell too. I post new obscure tales of the strange and supernatural every Friday night.